Welcome to Mac Power Users. I'm David Sparks and joined by my pal, Stephen Hackett. How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. Looking forward to today's show as we continue the state of the platforms. We've got some oddballs in this one, but we've also got the Mac. So we're going to cover them all. This is part two of the two-part series, state of the various Apple platforms. Last week we did the iPhone, iPad, basically the mobile platforms. This week we're picking up everything else, and I'm looking forward to getting started on this one. Before we do get started, however, you can gift a Relay membership right now at a very good price.
Yeah, absolutely. We are running a sale on all annual plans, so you can get a gift for somebody else, buy a gift for yourself, add a show to your existing plan. And you want to go to giverelay.com. The link is in the show notes. You get 20% off any annual plan. And it's a good reminder that we do more power users. That's a longer ad-free version of the show that you and I do each and every single week. And this week we are going to be talking about HomeKit. HomeKit's kind of those weird things, like it's a platform, but it's also a software feature, kind of hard. So anyways, we put that for our members. So go check that out, giverelay.com. The sale runs through December 18th. So be sure to go jump on board. It's a great time.
Yeah. And over at Mac Sparkyland, I'm doing a 20% sale right now on field guides. And that is set to end on December 2nd for the rest of the world for Mac Power Users listeners with the code MPU Gravy, all one word, no space. I'm going to extend it in a couple extra days because that's the day after the show publishes. So probably it'll run through like the 4th. I'll go and fix it after we record today. And for the first time, I'm including a brand new field guide as part of one of these sales. The shortcuts for iPhone and iPad isn't quite done yet. It's like 90% as I record this, but it's available to purchase with the special link we've got in the notes, and you'll get the 20% off that, which will, by the way, be a bigger discount than you'll get when it officially launches. So if you want to get that, just a few days left, MPU Gravy, links in the notes.
Awesome. I like in your photo on the Mac Sparky Field Guide, you have your fancy sign in the background.
Yeah, my Vista board.
You're really making that thing pay for itself.
Yeah, I love that thing.
I know.
I just love it. I love it. We had my daughter graduated, but then she ran off to an internship and blah, blah, blah. So we just had her graduation party last weekend, and I was using it at that. I love this thing. I don't know why. It just makes me happy.
Because it's incredible.
Right now it says the reward for good work is more work. How's that?
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Well, it didn't say that on Thanksgiving, but I'll put something more appropriate. But that's very inspirational to me.
It is. No,
it's like,
something to that.
The Walt Disney line. He said, we make movies because it allows us to make more movies.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about the field guides. It's like, if I make them good enough that people buy them, then I can afford to keep making them. And that's what I want to do. Anyway, enough of that hippie stuff. Let's talk about the state of the platforms. And I'm so happy because last week I was sitting on my hands the whole episode. I want to talk about the Mac, Stephen.
I know. I didn't mean to put that on week 2. It just sort of kind of the way it happened. But we're here. We're at the Mac. And just what a good time to be a Mac user. That's my opening statement. It's a great time to be a Mac user.
When we get to the introspective part, I'll just cheat ahead there a bit. This year is the 40th anniversary of the Mac.
Yeah, sure is.
40 years. But so keep that in your mind while we're talking through where things are. But I think the first place to begin is the engine, the Apple Silicon. So we're now at M4. We've been at this now several years of, this transition to Apple Silicon, and, we're firmly in it now. How is Apple doing? I would say they came out of the gates like roaring. Are they doing okay now that we're a few years into it?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think a big question we had in the beginning was, are they going to be able to keep this up? Like, yes, it's incredible that the M1 is just blows away the Intel machines, right? That never really should have been a surprise. But then you have to talk about M2 and M3 and M4 and so on. And I think they've proven over the course of the last couple of years that they got this, that they can continue to iterate on these things. And yes, there's weirdness around the edges. Like there's no M3 Ultra. And if you read like really nerdy stuff about how these chips are made, the process by which the M3 line was made was kind of a dead end technically. But maybe that's why there wasn't the Ultra, and the right now the Mac Studio and Mac Pro are stuck on the M2. Like, yes, there's still some weirdness, but these things are so performant. They're so very clearly capable of running Mac OS and its entire suite of applications. There were naysayers back when this was just a rumor of like, they're just gonna put iPhone chips in the Mac. Like, the Mac deserves better. It's like, no, the Mac is getting what it deserves. The Mac is getting world-class silicon that makes everything fast and efficient. And I couldn't be happier with where they are.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, M2, M3, M4 are not the kind of jumps that we had from Intel to M1. And it is interesting, though, we have enough samples now that they've all been pretty good upgrades, but we've had some that are better than others. Like as we're starting to learn more about the M4 and Macs, it's clear that this M4 generation is a big jump. And that's good, right? But at the same time, the M1s are still very good Macs.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard from so many people in Mac Sparky Labs that are used to like feeling itchy to upgrade now. Like they got an M1, now we're up to M4. They're thinking, well, I've had it, 3 or 4 years. I think it's time to get a new one. But as they look into it, they realize that they don't really need it. That it's just not. The M1 is still such a great computer that they're just not updating. And some are, of course, but it's not the usual upgrade cycle. And I think Apple accounts for that. I think they know that people are going to hold on to these longer because they're just better and they last longer. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've got a whole heading here on services. But I can't think of a way it could have gone much better than it has.
Yeah.
I wish that the cellular chip had developed in parallel. So by now we'd already have, M4 with the built-in cellular on the Mac. But overall, the actual processor, the thing this is supposed to do, I think it's just doing fantastic. And there's, specific hardware implementations we're going to break down in a minute, some of which I think could be better than others. But just the era of Apple Silicon, just bring it on more. I think this is just a golden era for the Mac.
I'm going to put in the show notes a link to a column on Macworld that Dan Morin wrote earlier in November about this exact thing, that Apple is going to face a challenge around the upgrade cycle on the Mac. And I think it's really well thought out and definitely goes into more detail about what we've spoken about. And the kind of the flip side of like the hardware is really good for a long time is that Apple supports these machines software wise for a long time. Like, honestly, I'm surprised that the 2024 version of Mac OS, back before we knew it was going to be called Sequoia, that it was still going to support Intel Macs. Now, the Intel Macs that it does support, like that list continues to dwindle, but at some point they're going to cut them off, but they haven't yet. They've moved, I think, slower in that regard than I thought. But that also raises the question of like, how long will the M1 be supported in Mac OS? I think it's going to be a really long time. And so when you combine this idea, like the chip and the Macs the chip is in are really good, and they're really good for a long time, and Mac OS supports them for a really long time, like that is going to continue to stretch out the upgrade cycle. And in his article, Dan is like, you know what? There's a reason people like the colors on the iMac. There's a reason this new Mac Mini has us also captivated. Like, is Apple going to do more with the hardware design to potentially lure in upgraders that otherwise like wouldn't look? And I think that's an interesting point of view on it.
Yeah, and I think we both would like to see Apple be more experimental and throw a few more bets on the table with hardware.
Definitely.
But let's start with the hardware that they do have. And the laptops are by far the biggest sellers. So I think it makes sense to start there with the little one, the 13-inch MacBook Air, currently shipping with the M3 chip, rumored to get M4 next spring. It's a great little computer. I mean, the M3 chip is no slouch. It's not the kind of jump that we got with M4. One of my biggest complaints about it when we first started talking about this show was the memory. But in the meantime, Apple has fixed that. They now ship to a level with 16 gigabyte of memory. So that's good. It's a solid computer with a very small hard drive.
Yeah, the storage, I think, is the next low-hanging fruit. Starting at 256 gigs is just, that's pretty snug.
Not enough.
No. Yeah. Even with things like iCloud Drive and Dropbox and iCloud Photos, like your data is not really on your computer, it's just sort of referenced. And like, even in this world, one, that assumes that someone is paying for iCloud space or Dropbox space or something like that, which is not always a given. There are lots of people who just ignore that you're out of space message. But it's also just kind of a bad experience. Like if you're always kind of bumping up against your storage limitations. And so I think now that we have 16 gigabytes of memory across the board, I think that the next thing is got to be, we've got to start at 512 gigabytes of storage. 256 is just not enough.
Yeah, but I really have no problem recommending this computer. You know, we always hear from friends and family, I'm going to get a new computer. Which one should I get? I feel like that's the starting point. 13-inch MacBook Air is going to be enough for most everybody. I do counsel people to upgrade the drive, the SSD, especially with the photos. Like just try and get it, big enough. And the phones take bigger and bigger size photos now, so these things crash into each other. I was thinking about this 13-inch MacBook Air because it wears a couple hats, right? It's the entry level, it's the college book. It's also the Apple's answer to an ultralight. It's not as ultralight as they've had in the past. Like, remember that? What was it? That little 11-inch? Remember that one?
Yeah, they had the 11-inch Air and then the 12-inch MacBook, both noticeably smaller than this computer.
Yeah. Do you think that the 13-inch MacBook Air is adequate to scratch the itch for an ultralight for people who want it?
I mean, there's always people who look back fondly. I think Jason Snell is one of these people who like wanted the smallest notebook possible when he was, on the bus going back and forth to Macworld back in the day. I think there are always people who are willing to say, look, I'll trade off screen size and battery life for something really small. I think the problem Apple had in those days where it was offering, especially the 12-inch MacBook, is that it was really confusing if you had $1,200 to spend on a laptop, which one you should get. Because, they had the entry-level MacBook Pro. That is now more expensive, so I think it clears some of this up. But if you do an ultralight, how do you position that in conjunction with the MacBook Air? That's tricky. And it just seems to me like Apple has all the parts to do an ultralight. Like that 12-inch MacBook would be incredible with Apple Silicon. In fact, if you remember, when Apple Silicon was just a rumor, we're talking about ARM Macs. Everyone said it. We said it was like, dang, 12-inch MacBook would be like the perfect thing with an ARM chip in it. And I still think that's true, but I think that Apple wants to keep sort of the bottom end of the MacBook line tidier, and they've done a really good job of it, right? There's a 13 and a 15-inch Air, 14 to 16-inch MacBook Pro. I think you've got to really kind of build the case that there's enough people out there that want this to confuse the rest of the buying sort of segment.
Yeah, see, this is where I'd like to see them place a bet. I think they should make a 12-inch ultralight. It should have the Apple cellular chip in it, so it works off. So it's got a cellular radio. I would probably increase the screen fidelity. I'd make it clearly better than a 13-inch MacBook Air. Put more storage in it. Do whatever you need to do to justify it. being more expensive than the Air, but a clear distinction point. Like when you go in and you're buying one for your college kid, this is not what you want. It's more expensive. It's smaller. This is for the people, the ultralight warriors. And like, I don't know, it's a, the fact that they're a $1 trillion company cuts both ways, right? It's like, no, they've got to focus on what really works. They got to keep the focus, yada, yada. We've seen all the presentations, but also it's like, you're a $1 trillion company. You could make an ultralight. I mean, I just think you could. And now, like, there are people inside Apple that are just itching, right? Because of Apple Silicon. They're like, yeah, but now we could do it so much better, And I want to see what that team would make. And now they got the keyboard madness out of their system. I don't know. I would like to see them make one. And I don't think this is really an ultralight. And for people who want that, there's nothing available for them except this one, which isn't really what they're looking for. So yeah, I do feel like at the bottom, the ultralight could exist. But the MacBook Air, getting back to the things they are making, with the addition of the 15-inch, it's just in such great shape. I mean, it is the default recommendation. And I think for almost everybody, it's the right recommendation. Just do you want the big screen or the little screen? And you should probably add some storage to it. And you're probably good. Yeah. And that computer will last you a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just went through this with a friend of mine who was looking for a laptop for work, just doing kind of regular office-y, like they're all in Google Workspace. So he doesn't need anything. He's not doing photo editing or anything like that. It's just office work. But he likes using a laptop just as a laptop. Like he has a docking station and stuff at his desk, but he ended up going with the 15-inch MacBook Air with M3 just for the extra screen real estate when he's not at his desk. And I've talked to him a couple times since he got it. And every time he sees me, he's like, man, this laptop is so good. It's like, yeah, the 15-inch really is. I think everybody I've talked to who has one, particularly the 15-inch, is like really happy that Apple did it. And I hope it's doing well for them because I think they should continue to offer the MacBook Air in two sizes. And I think the 15-inch Air, I mean, there really hasn't been a consumer notebook from Apple larger than 13 inches since like the iBook days. They had a 12 and 14-inch iBook, and that long-term Mac users will remember this. The 14-inch iBook had the same number of pixels as the 12-inch, so that meant the screen like the density, the PPI was lower on the 14 than the 12. So the 14-inch iBook screen looked muddy and a little blurry compared to the 12. It was awful. Like Apple had no business doing that. This time, however many 25 years later, they decide, okay, we need a larger consumer laptop again. They totally killed it. And I think everyone with the 15 really likes it.
Yeah, last night, I have been working really hard lately because I'm finishing up a field guide and I just got a lot going on. And I'd been in the studio for like 12 hours, but I still had to do a bunch of uploads for, in the field guide, you get the downloadable shortcuts for each video lesson.
Of course.
And so I took the 15-inch in the other room just to give myself a change of location. And with that much screen real estate, I was able to do like multiple windows, and I was just smiling. It's just like, yeah, this is a really nice computer. You can do serious work on a 15-inch screen, and with the Apple Silicon for the type of work I was doing, it was perfectly fine. Yeah, I love that. But if you want something better, the MacBook Pro line is also in really good shape with 14 and 16-inch variants. They've already got the new M4 chip, so you're going to get a nice performance bump. And I do think the M4 is kind of like another ledge to stand on, if that makes sense. Like M2 and M3 were really nice improvements of M1, whereas M4 feels like something different. And we made kind of another big leap. And so it's a good time to get in if you want to get a new computer. And man, the MacBook Pro, the beauty of the Mac Sparky Labs is I get to talk to people all the time who, show listeners or people who are into this stuff. And so many of them are using these new MacBook Pros and just love them. And I understand why.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. We mentioned a second ago the M3 was calling it a stumble is way overselling it, but it wasn't the jump that we had seen from M1 to M2, and the M4 looks excellent. Again, 16 gigabytes of memory standard. Battery life continues to be absolutely bonkers. Like I think Apple quotes up to 22 hours. Of course, that depends on usage and all this stuff, but they're great. And I know there was a little bit of talk with these machines of like, oh gosh, like they didn't make it thinner or lighter. And I don't want them to do that. Like I am so happy as someone who has worked on a MacBook Pro now for a couple of years. I'm so happy that it's a little bit thicker, so I get incredible battery life on the 14, that it's silent, that I don't hear the fans unless I'm really pushing it, and that I got MagSafe and HDMI and the SD card slot. Like I don't want it's so amazing how quickly people forget. I don't want to go back to where it's just Thunderbolt ports like it was from 2016 to 2020. That was a bad time. And I think when they rebooted the MacBook Pro and took the touch bar off and, made this a usable, workable Pro machine again, I think they made the right call in making it a little bit thicker. And I am just fine with it.
Yeah, you want thinner and lighter? MacBook Air is an excellent computer.
Exactly. Exactly. The problem in that 2016 era was everything was the same, right? The trade-offs between the Air and the Pro without a touch bar and the Pro with a touch bar, they weren't that different. And now it's like these are two, honestly, really distinct laptop lines. Yes, they kind of look the same. They have the same design language, but there's really no confusing the two, especially we haven't talked about it yet, especially talking about the screen. The MacBook Pro screen is the best screen Apple puts on a Mac, period. And it's
the best screen they make, period.
Yeah. It's so good. And look, it's a little lost on me, my M2 being plugged into a studio display, which is basically the same display since the 5K iMac. Like they need to, this needs to spread to other things. And it's not to say the MacBook Air screen is bad, but it's so clear when you walk into a store what's what, and that's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think of the Airs, really, Steve Jobs was the one who came up with the car and the truck analogy, but I think it really applies to these two computers. The Air is the car and the MacBook Pro is the truck. It's the beast. And there is nothing you can't do with a MacBook Pro. It's like at this point, I hesitate to say nothing, but I mean, just about anything you want to do that you used to have to go buy a big tower for, you can do with a MacBook Pro properly spec'd.
Yeah.
And like I've heard from so many people that are thinking about what you do, like saying, hey, you know what? I think it's time for me to just get one really ballsy MacBook Pro and be my single computer. And there's a lot of people making that switch now because like so many friction problems have been removed. The computers are strong enough. They're great. They're mobile. They're not too heavy, but they're heavy enough. The process of plugging it into a monitor and having it just work is kind of solved at this point. And like, there's just a lot of good reasons to just pick one. And the MacBook Pro is like there for you if that's your decision.
Yeah.
Okay. So we like the laptops. I would like to see an ultralight. I don't really know, in other hardware I'd like to see them explore is the touchscreen. I mean, I think it's something that I just like to see them look into some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I do find myself reaching out to touch laptops when I spend a lot of time on iPad, and I think there's something there, to each his own. I know like in the PC world, there's a lot of like what they call convertibles that like laptop / tablet. I'm not as interested in that, but I'm sure we've got listeners that would love one. But I do think there's room to explore like this form factor of a keyboard with a screen attached to it that opens up, like a clamshell. That is the laptop design we've had for a very long time. And with the efficient chips, the better displays, touchscreens, I feel like there's room to explore a bit, and I just wish Apple would throw a few of these out there. I mean, what's wrong with making a little bit of an experimental laptop that you don't intend to sell as many of, but to get your foot in the door and get some user feedback on? I think that stuff like that is something they should spend a little more time, like get some of that stuff out of the lab. I'm sure they're making that stuff and playing with it in the lab, but I'd like to see some of that stuff land in the Apple Store.
Even as options, like, so you don't want to go all in on cellular. Okay, let's have a cellular option for the MacBooks. You don't want to go all in on touchscreens. Let it be an option. Even that can be a way to move the ball forward, and they seem unwilling to do that for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think the cellular thing is they want to do it with their own radio.
Yeah.
And the rumors are that the Apple cellular radio is going to end up in the iPhone SE that gets released next year. That'll be the first time they use it in one of their products, and I would hope that the Mac isn't far behind that, because it's a lower volume, thing, and I can't imagine they wouldn't be thinking about that. Okay, let's switch over to desktops. So the line right now is fairly complete. There's a lot of options. You've got the iMac only in a 24-inch screen, which is bigger than the old small one and smaller than the old big one. But it's definitely sold as kind of like the MacBook Air of desktops. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's pretty much a MacBook Air in a desktop.
Yeah.
And they've got to the M4 chip. We both heard from a lot of listeners that are like, I want my big iMac. When are they going to make that? Any hope?
I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed. I think honestly, you're better served with a Studio Display and a Mac Mini at this point.
Yeah, I think the Mac Mini release and update was like the final nail in the coffin. I'm sure that could change if the market really demands it, but I think they're going to feel like, people like our Mac Minis and they get one of our displays and we're good. And the nice thing about that is, and that was always a knock against the iMac, is when the computer kind of got too old, but the screen was working fine. It felt like such a waste to, get rid of it with a perfectly functioning monitor, but a computer that isn't working. So now you get a display and then you can upgrade the thing you attach to it over the years.
Yeah. There was this article on The Verge about, it was their iMac review. And basically it was, the iMac is beautiful, but it's the ROM form factor for basically everybody. And like, I don't really agree with that. I think there are places where the iMac still makes sense. But it just got me thinking, like, and looking at this list in Notion, like, Apple makes a lot of desktop computers when 75% of the computers they sell are laptops. Like,
yeah,
I think Apple still cares about the desktop form factor. And that's exciting. And I think those of us who, even though I'm not using one right now, really like desktop Macs, like, it's a bit out of whack, I think, how many they make and how much investment they have in it. But it's also good because there are people, unlike this Verge article would suggest, that the iMac, just as it is, in 24-inch, base M4, and some fun colors, that's the perfect machine for them. And they are happy that Apple makes it.
Yeah. And then just like there's the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro in the laptop, we have a Mac Mini and a Mac Studio in the desktop, which kind of serve the same roles.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Sort of that parallel.
Yeah. I mean, it's so clear. I mean, we're just a few weeks into this new Mac Mini redesign, but if you want to get a desktop computer, for most people, one of the Mac Mini builds is going to be exactly what you need.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Apple Silicon. You can get it up to a Pro chip. I mean, we're in a weird spot right now because of the M3 not making it to the Mac Studio, where the Mac Mini is right now overclocking the Mac Studio, which I don't think is what Apple intends. But even if they had the same generation chips in them, the Mac Mini is enough computer for almost everybody. and I just feel like that's the go-to. Again, like when people ask me if they want a laptop, I tell them MacBook Air. If they want a desktop, I tell them Mac Mini.
Yeah, I think it's the right answer. And if it doesn't have enough ports or something, like you can easily solve that with a Thunderbolt dock. That's probably bigger and hotter than the Mac Mini itself, which is just kind of funny. But yeah, I think Apple really knocked it out of the park here. And, you know, the Mac Studio, I'm sure will get the M4 Max and Ultra down the road. But a lot of people don't need that much horsepower, and the M4 and M4 Pro would be more than enough for them. So yeah, I agree. I think if you're looking for a desktop Mac, this is the one. And I think it's going to stay that way for a while because the way they've positioned it with the Mac Studio kind of being the upper half of the range and the Mac Mini kind of being the bottom half of the range where most people are. I think they've really kind of made sense of this lineup pretty clearly, I think.
I mean, even for my needs, I think I'm either a high-end Mac Mini or a low-end Mac Studio guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I could absolutely get by with a Mac Mini, even though I probably would never buy one because of, I guess, ego. I'm not sure. I would want a Mac Studio. I just love the Mac Studio so much. Let's switch over to that one. I mean, now it looks bigger because of the existence of the Mac Mini.
It looks humongous.
It's an extremely small, very powerful thing on your desk with a ton of I/O in the back. I don't have any of those plug-in, devices because I can get everything I need plugged into this thing. I just love this computer. I like you. I don't know what my future holds. Like I think I'm good for a while. I'm on an M2 Mac Studio, and I think like maybe the M6 generation is when I'll look to see if it's worth upgrading. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if at that point I'll get another Mac Studio or if I'll get a MacBook Pro and follow you down that road. I don't know, but but I love this computer, and like it's like something between a Mac Pro and a traditional iMac. It's a category that really hasn't existed before, and I think it's just like perfect for me at least.
It is the one oddball though, because we did not see an M3 Ultra. And we have not seen the M4 Ultra yet. I think the rumor is like spring or maybe WWDC for the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro to get updated. So they are a little behind right now, which does give the Mac Mini a kind of even a brighter shine than I think it would have otherwise. It's totally deserving of all praise that it has gotten, I think. But that's a little bit weird, right? If you need a high-end desktop right now from Apple, it's like, well, I don't... It's not a great option.
Then they're going to walk you over to the MacBook Pro table. Yeah. But I think eventually we'll get to an M4 Mac Studio, and it'll be a beast, and it'll be great. And I don't think this is temporary. I guess that is one thing we didn't mention in our discussion of Apple Silicon. Do you think the pacing is acceptable of M1 to M2, M2 to M3? Are they at a clip that makes sense to you?
I think so. In the later Intel years, it was every year to year and a half. And those were far less notable updates than what we're getting now. And so, yeah, I think it totally works. And my one complaint is like what's going on at the high end. I don't think your high-end machines, desktop machines, should be left in the cold like they have been. But I suspect that's a one-off, and that I think this will be smoother moving forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said earlier, the M3 kind of like had a problem in terms of getting the Ultra kind of chip out of an M3. It was very expensive, and the process. I'm no expert on this, but as I understand it, the die shrink had costs with it, and they got better at making them with a new build. I forget what the designator is, but the M4 is kind of a new path, and I think they just decided it was easier to skip it than to try and make that work with the high-end machines. I don't know that that'll be true with the M5. You know what I mean? I don't know that they're going to skip a generation with these upper-end desktops, but that could be the plan because it's a small percentage of the market. And honestly, if you have an M2 Mac Studio, you're not really hurting at this point, so if you have to wait another year, I guess so be it. If you really must have the latest and greatest, then you need to get on the laptop front. But I think for most folks, you get one of these and you hold on to it for a while. So
Yeah,
I'm not
definitely.
sure it's as big of a deal as podcasters make it out to be. Um, although I will say, the big question mark in Mac hardware of all of them, honestly, is the Mac Pro. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's not clear to me. Like, did they just not intend? Was the Mac Studio going to be it at some point? Was that going to be just the new name for the Mac Pro? But they came out with a Mac Pro, and it's really no different than the Mac Studio with the Ultra chip, except it's got some more expansion, but it's not like a process improvement. And there was a lot of rumors in the early days of Apple Silicon that they had another tier to the chip. Basically everything is, doubled. You get the standard chip, and then you double that to a Pro, then you make two Pros for a Max, and you make two Maxes for an Ultra. And then there was some kind of thing where it was going to be two Ultras for some new level of chip. And there were rumors about that, and it just didn't show up for whatever reason. And we've been talking about this for years when they first announced the Mac Pro. Is this a placeholder for whenever they can make that super, that double Ultra chip, and this will be the computer that holds that? I don't know. But right now, the Mac Pro is in a weird spot.
It is. I mean, the only thing that sets it apart is you can throw some PCI cards in it that aren't GPUs. That was sort of the other question, is like, well, are they going to offer the ability to upgrade the GPU over time? Well, on Apple Silicon, that's all on die, right? It's all in the system on a chip. It's different. I had the 2019 Mac Pro, and it came with whatever base GPU it was in, and I upgraded it down the road. And it's like you take the cover, the case off, and you put a new GPU in it, and you reboot, and you got bam, new capability. That's not how Apple Silicon works, and doesn't seem like that's going to be the way Apple Silicon works. And so I think the real question is, like, how many people are putting PCI cards in an Apple Silicon Mac? And I'm sure there are people out there like this is a must-have feature, and I suspect the Mac Pro will continue, but I don't think it's ever going to be like on its own at the top of the line the way that it once was. I think it's always going to share the crown with the Mac Studio.
What would you like to see Apple do in terms of hardware for the desktops to take some risks? What would you like to see them make?
I mean, I would love to see that whatever's beyond an Ultra, like the M4 Extreme or something, right? And really set the Mac Pro apart. I think that's my lowest hanging fruit. Not that I would buy that machine. Like, I'm not in that market. It's way overkill for me. And I've sort of scratched my Mac Pro itch with the 2019, but I think that would be exciting to see what Apple could do there to make the Mac Pro, like, it would be super expensive, like really make it stand on its own 4 feet, like separate from the Mac Studio. That, and I think, as much as I don't think they're going to do it, I think a bigger iMac, I think people want it, but again, I don't see Apple doing that either, really.
I would love them to make that convertible iMac that occasionally I get wistful about. Microsoft made I think it was called the Surface Studio, if memory serves. It was an iMac with a really clever hinge in it, and then it basically kind of hinges down to a drafting board. And in my mind, it would be a Mac when it's vertical, and then switch over to iPad OS when you make it flat, when you bring it down to drafting board mode. And that would be like, with Apple Silicon, you could totally pull that off. And I think that would be amazing. But I just feel like that's like a bridge too far. I think we're going to be lucky if they just keep supporting desktops the way they are. I don't think they're going to make my dream computer, but man, I would love for that. If they gave me the reins, that would be like, just make one to see what happens, But, to answer your question earlier, these things are going to last so long. People might be tempted to buy a rotating iMac that turns into a giant iPad. I don't know. The Mac is 40 years old. Is the hardware okay? I mean, is this what, if you wound the clock back and you looked at that first Mac with the handle on your desk, is this current Mac look like something that you would imagine 40 years later?
I think that's a funny question because there's so much about the original Mac that's actually more true than it has been in recent years. Like
Yeah.
there was a lot of commodity hardware in the original Mac, but the idea of like it being a closed box that like you don't have to worry about what's inside, it just does magic. Like
Yeah. It's still that kind of, right?
yeah, I think honestly more true than has been in a long time because everything is soldered in. Like you can't upgrade it. Like the appliance, air quotes, appliance-ness of the hardware is just as true today as it was back then, if not more so. You know, I think if you sat an original Macintosh user, right, you put them in a coma in 1984, you wake them up today, you set them in front of an M4 iMac, like, oh, like, yeah, a lot of the same kind of vibes are here, right? It's a friendly all-in-one. You know, we're still using mice and keyboards. We're not touching the screen. The menu bar is still at the top. Like, it is funny how much of the Mac has been so consistent over its 4 decades.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've said it enough, but I'd like to see them be a little more liberal with hardware design and try some new stuff out.
Yeah.
But I think we've probably beat that drum enough.
Get weird. You know, we talked about it with the
Yeah.
iPhone last week. Like, it's okay to get weird.
Yeah. And it's a big business and they make a lot of money off these computers. I'm not saying that you replace the MacBook Air with something weird.
Yeah.
I'm saying put something weird, add something weird, you know?
Yeah. Put it down at
just
the
see
end
what
of the
happens.
table in the Apple Store. You know, no one will notice. What's that thing?
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. It's a
And remember when they made an iPod with no buttons? I mean, they were willing to take risks with big products in the past, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that didn't really work, but they took a shot at it, you know?
They did.
Yeah.
They sure did. Man, no one liked that thing.
Yeah. All right. Software on the Mac. That's also 40 years old. Mac OS is 40 years old.
It is. I mean, even the Mac OS 10 era, you know, started in 2001. So we're 24, almost 24 years into the Mac OS 10 era. It's actually, we've been in that era longer than the classic Mac OS now. I think Sequoia is a great release. You know, it's hard to judge. I find it hard to judge Mac OS releases because they happen annually, and that's been that way for a long time, and I still disagree with it, but that's okay. Like, I'm not going to get in my way. But year to year, it means that not a lot changes. And like, it's kind of hard to like, okay, what came in Ventura and what came in Sonoma? But I think this year in particular with Sequoia, I think Apple's features that bring the iPhone into the Mac, so iPhone mirroring, iPhone notification mirroring, like those features are, I think, fantastic. I use the iPhone mirroring all the time. I just sort of blog post about that. Notifications, like we talked about it a little bit last week, you got to turn them off. Like you don't need all of your iPhone notifications coming to your Mac. I just have a select few now. You can manage that on a per app basis on the iPhone and settings. But I love that Apple is really continuing to build on continuity, something that we saw with iOS 8, and I think El Capitan, I think was the same year, about that time. Continuity in the beginning was very simple, right? It's like, oh, I have a Pages document open here, and I pick up my iPad, and it's ready for me. Like, but they've continued just to layer more and more features on to this to a point of like, now I just use my iPhone like it's a Mac app, and it just sits on the charger at my desk at work. It's awesome. And I want more of it. Like I said in my blog post, I want that in Vision OS. We'll talk about all that. But I think Apple this year in particular, bringing its ecosystem closer together, making the Mac a more central point for the other things you do, I think that's good for the Mac. And so while it can be hard sometimes, I think, to kind of suss out, like, when did this get better? When did that change? If you zoom out, I think the last 3 or 4 Mac OS releases clearly have been about the Mac should have the same features, should have this even unique features to the ecosystem that pull all these things together.
I agree. I think it's a very solid operating system, and the year-to-year updates are very much quality of life things at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a concerted effort that started about 10 years ago that has now completed updating the file system. Like a lot of the kind of under the hood stuff of the operating system has been cleaned up. I feel like they've done tons of work on security in terms of locking down the system so it's harder to, break in. It's not like the old .bat file days, right? You really your Mac is more secure than it's ever been for good reason. So all of that is good. That being said, if you went to Sparky 40 years ago, first time I laid hands on a Mac and said, what do you think this will be like in 40 years? I would have assumed it would have been much more HAL 2000 like. I feel like, there'd be voice interaction and, a lot of things that are now starting to seem possible with the rise of AI and some other technologies. I thought we would have already been there. But I hope that Apple continues to kind of push towards that stuff because I really do feel like a keyboard and mouse after 40 years, I don't know. I mean, I just felt like we would have something better and it would be more intuitive. Like the reason this show exists is because people need to learn to be power users because, it's not good enough yet without, bringing the power user juice. And I thought we'd be farther than that by now. But I also, looking back, see why it's not, and but we might be at the crossroads of something much better with just kind of emerging technologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like from the user experience perspective too, especially counting from the Mac OS 10 era forward. Like if you go back and look at screenshots of the public beta of Mac OS 10 and you jump straight to Sequoia, and you can do that on 512 pixels in the screenshot library.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Like they've added lots of complexity and like lots of new things, but I think that speaks to two things. One, you nailed the first of like, we haven't had a paradigm shift in terms of input and control that I think a lot of people thought we would have. And Apple has tried like Siri's been on the Mac for a while, but the idea that you're going to ask Siri to like find all your files that are PDFs with dogs in them, like that's just not how people use their computer. On the other part of it is like, it speaks to how good Apple got it on the first try. They're like, yes, early versions of Mac OS and early versions of Mac OS 10 in particular had some weird ideas in them, but the basics were so good in the beginning that they've really been able to build on those over time. And they've evolved it, right? Like, it doesn't look the same and it's got more controls. Like, this year we got all the window management stuff. But the bones were really good from the beginning, and I think that's something that they don't get enough credit for.
Yeah, and honestly, just kind of getting to the feelings part, I think the Mac is in great shape. I'm very happy. The hardware is great. The software is solid. There's things I'd like to see them do differently, but a few years ago, like we were actively wondering, well, what happens to a show called Mac Power Users if Apple stops making the Mac?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's not a worry anymore. The Mac is just such a utility player, and just so important. And they'll have to take it from my cold, dead hands, as they say.
And if you're still worried about that, look no further than the Apple Silicon transition. Apple would not have done this if the Mac was going away, right? It would just linger on Intel and slowly fade away. And that is not what has happened. They continued to make massive investments in the Mac. They just redesigned the Mac Mini. Like the Mac line is not going anywhere. And yeah, that was a scary time. That 5 or 6 years was really hard, but they've come out the other side. And I think the Mac has renewed enthusiasm within Apple and in the user base. I think people are excited about the Mac in a way they haven't been in a long time. And it's very encouraging as someone who truly, like, out of all of these platforms, the Mac is the one I care the most about. That question of like, oh, if you only could use one Apple product, what would it be? It would be the Mac. I would give up all the rest of it and keep my MacBook. And so as that person, I'm very happy that it's in the place that it is.
Yeah. I'm the same. My answer is the same. As great as the iPhone is, I need my Mac.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building an awesome website. If you're an entrepreneur or you're just getting started or you're somewhere in between, if you need to stand out and succeed online, you need to head to Squarespace. You can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything, products, services, and even content with Squarespace. You can make the most of design intelligence. It combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential. Design intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful and more personalized website tailored to their unique needs and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. But how do you get discovered? How are people going to come check out your beautiful website? Well, that's where fast, integrated SEO tools come in. Every Squarespace, out of the box, is optimized to be indexed with meta descriptions and auto-generated sitemap and more, so you show up more often to more people in global search results. And you can keep up with that traffic with analytics, measure your end-to-end online performance with powerful website and seller analytics. Get insights on top traffic sources, understand how your reach is growing, track sales metrics, and learn where to focus new engagement. It's all the data you need to scale your brand or business, and it's fully integrated and clearly displayed. That's actually one of my favorite things about Squarespace. They have all these tools built in. They all understand each other. They all work together. You're not having to add on a bunch of stuff to your site. And if you are looking to build a site, I definitely recommend going with Squarespace. It's always my first choice. So head on over to squarespace.com/MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain name. That's squarespace.com/MPU. When you decide to sign up, you'll get 10% off your first purchase and show your support for the show. Our thanks to Squarespace for their support of Mac Power Users and all of Relay.
Okay, so a new piece of hardware that we've never covered in State of the Platforms, Vision Pro.
Yeah.
Welcome to the State of the Platforms, Vision Pro. I have an opening statement on Vision Pro.
Please.
I like the Vision Pro. I've been listening to all these podcasters dump on it, and I just don't. I understand. I understand why people don't like it and feel like it's not what it could be. But earlier I was saying Apple needs to place some bets. I feel like this is a bet. And they released this thing. It's kind of beta in a lot of ways, right? I mean, they weren't exactly sure what people would do with it. We're still figuring out the software situation. There's clearly a lot of improvement to be made. But I like and use the Vision Pro regularly, even though it's still rough around the edges.
Yeah, I think you are more optimistic about it or more enthusiastic maybe than me. But it is really exciting anytime there is a new platform. And I think like the iPad, like the more I've thought about this and prepping these 2 episodes and just really kind of being reflective on this, the more I sort of come to realize that the Vision Pro has a lot in common with the iPad, sort of in terms of where it is. But we can get that in a second, I guess. I guess we can stay on hardware for a minute. But the hardware for like a version 1 is incredible. It is the only device like this that has not given me motion sickness. Everything else I've tried has made me feel sick. And I'm extremely sensitive to that. Like I'm not reading in a car. I can barely be a passenger in a car after a while. But all of the hardware, the M2, the R1, which does this like dedicated processing input stuff, the screen refresh rate, all of it comes together and makes something that I can really use. And that's a first for me. And all credit to the hardware team that made that possible, because I was nervous. I said on this show, Anno Connected, I was like, I'm really afraid that I'm going to spend all this money and I'm not going to be able to use the thing because it makes me sick. And I'm very happy to report that's not true.
Yeah. I mean, it is a version 1 hardware. Like, Apple makes it with nice materials and they try to make it look nice. but it's bulky. The battery isn't contained in the device. You got to run a cord down your shirt. I am sure that is not like the end game for them with this product. But at the same time, it is what it is to get it out the door and run hardware that's fast enough that Steven doesn't get sick when he wears it. And I think that is kind of like, I really think that is kind of like the entry level for them.
Oh,
is
yeah.
they wanted to make something that had a frame rate and sufficient graphics that, you know, most people will be okay using it. And I think that was a mission accomplished. But of course it could be better, right? I mean, you know, even like the way like I unplug it when I'm done, but I have to go in and shut it down. Then I unplug it, and then like when I want to start it up again, it's a thing. It's not like an iPad where you just pick it up and you push a button, or frankly any other Apple device. It's a process, you know, and all of that can get better. But I like wearing it. I like working in it. I'm in there 2-3 times a week. I do a lot of writing in there. I consume a lot of media. I finally got around to watching Silo because you told me I needed to watch it.
Yeah.
I haven't got to the new season yet, but I've almost finished the first season. And I love going in there and watching that show in the theater mode in Vision Pro. It's like having a movie theater in my house. It's just, I don't know. I think it's more of a, win. It just feels to me like, to talking to people that haven't used it or bought them and are unhappy with the purchase, that like it's a big bust. And I think it's kind of what they expected from it. It's the first version of something that they're working on for the future. And sometimes I think I'm too much of a fanboy, but I like it. You know, I don't know what to say. I think there's a ton wrong with it. Like I said, the hardware needs work. The software, it's shocking to me that like Apple's own productivity apps are still not native to Vision OS.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're in version 2 now and they're still not out. So like how is like Reminders not a native app? You know, when OmniFocus pulled it off very quickly, and you know and a bunch of other productivity apps did as well. So I feel like that's kind of bad. The new feature in beta with the new widescreen Mac display has suddenly made using my Mac in it much more useful. It is a massive improvement. I don't know if you've tried it yet, but so now the Mac becomes a screen when I'm in Vision Pro, so I can do Mac things in there as well. So there's good things about the software. The third party story is just kind of sad. I feel like there's some good stuff in there, but a lot of developers are sitting and waiting.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Apple needed to seed more hardware out or if they needed to do work on developer relations or whatever, but there's a bunch of apps that I think would benefit from being there that just aren't there. So when people tell me all the complaints about it, I absolutely hear you and I agree with you on a lot of them, but I'm optimistic about the platform because it's delightful to strap that thing on and work and be able to put myself in Yosemite or somewhere else. And I find it just a real key player for me now. Even if I'm the only person in podcast land that does that.
I think you're right about some of the hardware stuff being a bit weird. I think the battery life in particular is kind of not great. And mine, because I don't use it that often, like it takes a long time to boot up, and like sometimes I gotta like unplug the thing. Like there's some weirdness around that. But I totally agree with you about the suite of Apple apps. Not only is it frustrating as a user of those apps, but honestly, it also sets an example for third-party developers. Like if Apple is not excited about bringing its own apps to the Vision Pro, why should developers? It's really expensive. And I can tell you, as someone who has worked on an app in Vision OS, you can only get so far with the simulator. Like it really pays off to actually have one of the things and run your app on it. And that's an expensive proposition. And I've seen a lot of developers on Mastodon and other places talk about, look, my users aren't here. I can't really justify the expense of owning one of these things and the development time and keeping my Vision OS version of my app up to date with the iPhone version. And that's all solvable if the user base just really takes off. But there are people who aren't going to use this thing until their apps are on it. And you do have, to a degree, a chicken and egg problem there, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And the same thing with, I didn't even mention content. Like, I feel like Apple needs to not wait for the content to come to the platform. They need to spend some of their money to make sure it gets there to pay for it. And they're doing that to an extent, but I expected more, frankly. And that seems like that wheel is turning faster now, but not fast enough. I really do think of all Apple product releases I've ever experienced, this is feels the most like a beta product. The original Apple Watch felt a little bit like it was too early when it got released, like it wasn't fully cooked. But this one really feels like something like, okay, well, let's put this out there and see what happens. And I understand why that's a complaint, but that can also be a compliment. But I can tell you, if it is a beta product, I'm finding ways to use it, and I'm generally positive about it. I don't know, what the future holds. I hope I hope they've got the wherewithal to keep developing it and see where this goes.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like this is a product that 40 years after release, if they're still making it, will look very different. It's not going to be the similarity that we see between a modern and an old Mac. I think it's going to be something entirely different in the future.
I think so too. I tend to think that the future that other companies have shown us of like you see through the product and not through cameras,
Yeah.
that feels like the direction. I'm not sure pass through is the ultimate destination in terms of the visuals of it. But I think the other part of it is like, as good as the controls are, like the eye tracking and the hand tracking, like seems to work very well. I'm going to say something here I thought about. It feels like Vision OS feels like an iPad that's even harder to use from a power user perspective. You're doing a lot of window management, all the window management yourself. You are bouncing between things in a way that is kind of clunky. And you ultimately are dealing with apps that are really outside of a small number of apps that are really made for like the spatial environment, like some games and some entertainment experiences. But from the productivity standpoint, the apps are iPad apps. They may not be stuck in compatibility mode. They may have the fancy visuals, but in terms of complexity, that's where Vision OS is. It's much closer to iPad OS than Mac OS. And that, for someone like me or someone who is really Mac centric in their usage, this thing is not a computer, right? This thing is not the way that I want to use a computer. This thing's incredible for entertainment. It's incredible for connection with the spatial FaceTime calls, but it's hard. Like I'm not thinking about this in the same category I'm thinking about my MacBook. And I think Apple wants it to get there, and maybe it will, but it's not there right now.
Maybe we should start doing some of our MPU planning calls in it, because I almost never use it to talk to other people. I mean, I just don't really have other people to talk to in it. But the eye tracking thing, it's good enough to launch apps and move around the interface, but it's not good enough to do work. That's the thing. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than wanting to click a button, looking at the button, tapping your finger, and then the button next to it clicks, right? And that happens. I mean, there's a reason when I work on this thing, I'm sitting in a chair with a keyboard and trackpad in my lap, because I can't rely on the visual the eye tracking thing to be refined enough for the kind of work I want to do in there when I'm actually doing work. And I want to be able to click a button without having to like tell my eyes to look harder at a button,
That's totally a thing. It's like, no, look more. It's like,
yeah. So yeah, there's work to be done.
Yeah.
But I'm just in terms of feelings, I like that this exists, and I get enjoyment out of using it. I like, there's a lot of it that I see the direction it's going, and I hope they continue down the road.
Yeah, I think they will. I think people who wonder like, oh, is this going to go away, or is this a dead end? Like I don't think that's the case at all. I think they're going to continue to invest in it, and maybe it won't be as fast as Apple once thought it would be, but I don't think this thing is going anywhere.
I also think it's going to fork. It's at some point it's going to be a pair of glasses, but it's also going to be a full immersive thing, because I think the immersive thing is really useful. I'd like that. I mean, I'd like there to be both products,
Yeah.
frankly.
One thing I meant to ask you a second ago when you're talking about entertainment in it, are you using AirPods or are you using the built-in audio?
Just the built-in audio.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's really good. I think they really nailed that. I think a lot of discussion on the Vision Pro rightly centers around the visuals, but they did do a good job with the audio as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like I don't watch a lot of TV and entertainment, but there's a lot of great little like mini series, in the sci-fi kind of space or fantasy space. That's kind of the stuff that I want to watch. My wife and kids are zero interest in it. So this is like the perfect place for me to go do that. Like now they've got a new Dune one out on Max. I haven't watched it yet, but when I get around to it, I'll do it in the Vision Pro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really, like, they've really done a good job with that. But it does like right next door to that thought is that's fantastic if you're watching it by yourself, like you said.
Yeah.
Right. It is. This is one reason, like, my wife is not a fan of this product and why it lives in my office. She doesn't like the barrier it creates. Right.
Sure.
This is not something I'm like. Apple took a lot of heat, rightfully so, about the video at launch of like the guy taking the spatial photo of his kid at the birthday party. And like, spatial photos are incredible and they look, I mean, the experience is kind of overwhelming, but hey, I'm looking through this thing that will change. Like if they fork this and it becomes a pair of glasses, this kind of part of the argument goes away. But the Vision Pro inherently is a lonely product. And that's great if you're on an airplane or on a train or by yourself in a hotel room on a trip and you just want to watch a football game and or watch a movie, and that's fine. There's something different about it than even the iPhone, which is also can be a very lonely device and distracts us and puts distance between us and the people around us. And Apple's, I'm doing giant air quotes, solution of that, of like having fake eyeballs on the front of it, isn't a solution. Like that's creepy, and I think it's going to go away.
And I'm not actually saying that anybody listening should go out and spend $3,500 on one of these things, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of like getting a peek at the future and playing with the stuff and figuring out where it fits. And for me, it was a worthwhile investment. How about you? Are you if Apple said, "Hey, we'll give you your money back today if you give us back the thing," would you turn it in?
I feel like for me, like the line of like I need it for my work, like the Vision Pro is so close to that line, it's basically on top of it. Like it is useful for things like this. It is useful when we're working on Widgetsmith. There are uses for it in my work, but it is basically entirely a work device for me. Like I'm not watching stuff on it. I'm on a FaceTime call a couple of times a month with some friends on it, but if I didn't do this for a living, I would want my money back. I do it for a living, and like it's basically a coin flip.
You don't really have a choice, honestly, because of what you do. But but yeah, I kind of hear what you're saying. Yeah, if it wasn't for the fact you're doing these things, this wouldn't be for you. Especially if you're not using it for like media consumption and doing any of the productivity stuff. It's like, then what's the point of owning it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious to see how the development cycle of this works. The update we got from Vision OS 1 to 2 felt like kind of a 0.5 update.
Yeah.
But in fairness, they just released the product this year. So it's not like they had a lot of time. I would like to see, how aggressive they are with the software updates, the gestures and whatnot when they have a full year to develop it. So I'll be very curious to see what we get in June of next year. And I'm, like I said, I like the product. I understand why it's a very small seller and why most people are not interested in it. And I know there are a lot of things that need fixing, but I'm glad it exists.
And it's the first year, and thinking about like the Apple Watch's first year or the iPhone's first year, they sort of struggled in weird ways too. The iPad, I think, is really the only one in sort of recent history that like kind of nailed it out of the gate. Like, this is what the iPad's good for, and all these apps are here because the iPhone was already successful. The Vision Pro is more like the Apple Watch in terms of not really sure how it fits in, not sure what it's good for. If you remember the original Apple Watch pitch, it was like Kevin Lynch was up there demoing a billion things your watch was going to do for you. But here we are 10 years later, and it's notifications and fitness. And when they pitched Apple Vision Pro, it was Alan Dye up there showing us a billion things this thing could do. And is it going to come down to entertainment and FaceTime calls? Like, maybe. We're in that phase still. It's just, it's a bit more awkward, and it's a bigger magnet for criticism when it costs $3,500, and Apple very clearly was very excited about it in a way that, like, I think Tim Cook personally was excited about this, and I'm not sure I felt that in any other thing that's happened in his reign in terms of product, maybe other than the Apple Watch. And so all of that, it turns up the heat on this product, and Apple's got to continue to move it forward.
Okay, you want to switch over Apple TV and Apple TV Plus?
Yeah, I think we put these together because they're hard to separate. You've got...
They have the same name.
Oh my, yeah. So you have the Apple TV hardware that runs the Apple TV app, through which you can watch Apple TV Plus content. And the TV app is also on a bunch of things. Like, what are we doing? It's very complicated. Per our tradition, maybe we start with the Apple TV hardware. It's a couple of years old now. It's powered by the A15 Bionic from the iPhone 13 series. The new, it's got the new Siri remote. It's 4K. It's Dolby Vision, HDR10 plus. Like, the hardware seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. You linked a Daring Fireball article that John Gruber wrote, arguing that no, they shouldn't make a stick. They should keep doing what they're doing. And I largely agree with it. I thought one of the big points from John's article that I would agree with is that I'd love to see it get down to $100. Like, it's currently $130 or $129. Get it down to $99 if you can.
Yeah, it's a little too expensive. And they also do this weird thing where there's two models. So the $129 one, 64 gigabytes of storage. To this day, no one knows what storage is for on the Apple TV. Like, no one's ever run out of storage on an Apple TV. Like, no one's downloading tons of games. It's fine. That one is Wi-Fi only. And there are people who do want gigabit Ethernet to their Apple TV. You don't need it, but people want it. That one is $149, and it doubles the storage. Lots of weirdness there. I think, maybe keep the more expensive one, but I totally agree. $99 is where this should be. It's competing with things that are much cheaper than it. And that's weird. And it's always kind of been that way with the Apple TV. But it's, especially 2 years into it, like, I could see this thing needing to come down in price some.
Something about the Apple TV, and this is kind of ties over to hardware, to software, is just that modern TV manufacturers make a lot of their money selling your data, right? You get a TV, you connect it to the internet, and then they know so much about you. And Apple doesn't really do that. You hook up an Apple TV and it's just the box. It's the internet for you. And I feel like that is a big advantage of an Apple TV if you're privacy focused. Like, my TVs, I never connect them to the internet. I don't get like hardware or firmware updates to my TVs, whatever they are. When I take them out of the box from Costco, that's what they are until the TV dies. And you just plug a Apple TV puck into it, and that's your TV. And I think there's an argument for Apple to make with that. If they can get their act together with Apple Intelligence, there may be some way you can leverage that to make a better TV viewing experience. I don't know. So long as you can do it locally and safely and privately.
Yeah.
But I think if there's a future Apple TV, it's to to argue that it's better rather than try to get down in the like low price, sticks.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. TVs should not be on the internet. Only bad things happen. Mine, I put on the internet every once in a while just to make sure it is up to date, and then I take it back off because I don't want any of that going on. I don't even know if LG does it, but too many TV manufacturers do it. I think the other kind of interesting thing here, hardware wise, is that Apple's really struggled in the remote department for a long time. And I think the new one's pretty good. And I think what most people want is for it to be Find My compatible.
Yeah.
Because I know about you, but in my house with, 2 high schoolers and an elementary school kid, no one knows where the Apple TV remote is at any time. And I even 3D printed this thing. It sits on top of the Apple TV, and it's a little bin, and it stores the TV remote and the Apple TV remote upright. So you like drop them into it. And it's like, hey, this is where the remotes go. No one ever does it. It's always gone, but I can't find it.
The couch eats it, and
Yeah.
We are both cranky dads about that stuff. A few years ago, I bought a thing off Amazon. I put a link in the notes. It was $9, still $9. It's kind of bulky, but it has an AirTag holder in it, and I just put AirTags on them. And occasionally, I AirTag the remote, and I find it like in the refrigerator or between 2 cushions or whatever. And this little rubber thing I recommend is good because it's 2 years old. And historically, when I bought those rubber inserts for the Apple TV, they would always get loose after a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
Like the rubber starts to soften or relax. I think because of the bulkiness of this thing, it's never done that, and everything holds together really well.
Yeah, that's
so. Good. If you want a $9 solution to that problem, well, $9 plus the cost of an AirTag.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
Yeah. Which are always on sale, by the way. Never pay full price for AirTags. Someone always has them on sale. My dad sent me a thing the other day. He bought a 4-pack. Best Buy was having them for Black Friday, and he was like, it was way cheaper. Like, yes, go do it. Like, I think the hardware, it's a couple years old. Yeah, it's a little too expensive, but I think they're doing a good job with it. Mine, I think like yours and I think most people, like I never think about my Apple TV hardware. Like it never acts up. It never does anything weird. It's just super solid. And that's what I want, right? We talked about the appliance nature of the Mac. That's super important to me, at least in something that's in my entertainment system. It's like, no. Like you will never misbehave. Like you were always going to be there. You're always going to wake up when I hit the button. It's been very good.
I feel like a lost opportunity in the software stack is something akin to Panic's old status board TV app, where like because it's tied into your Apple Gear, it would be easy enough to like make a map app that fed it like news feeds and your calendar and things that are your reminders list or whatever, and you could have it run like a status board independently connected to your cloud data. And I'm just kind of surprised Apple's never made that for the TV because it just makes a lot of sense. And I think that would be like the perfect way to get people to buy them for like, the conference room TV and things like that too. Yeah. And honestly, there's no apps that really do it either. Every 6 months or so, I look through the TV app store to see if somebody's made one.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a few, but they've been very, lackluster.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just something that Apple needs to make. But I feel like if I had the software team, I'd say, guys, come on, just make this thing.
There's rumors of like some sort of thing you mount on your wall that like controls your HomeKit and audio stuff in your house. And like maybe that would have some benefit to this like Apple TV dashboard thing. I mean, they've done a little bit. Like if you have HomeKit cameras, it'll give you a little preview when a camera goes off. Like if, the alarm is set or something, you get a notification, but they could do so much more. And I think you're right, in particular in corporate spaces where it's basically just mandatory you put an Apple TV in for AirPlay purposes. if your TV doesn't support it directly, then why not? It's just like an extra benefit. And so that would be really cool.
You want to switch over to Apple TV Plus?
Yeah, it's before we get to the content side, there's something on the business side that I think is really interesting. And I was kind of aware of this, but until I looked into it for this episode, I honestly was overwhelmed. Apple TV Plus, the service, is on just a huge list of televisions made by Sony and Roku, and they're on the Fire TV and Android TV and Google TV, and like these things are, Samsung and Vizio, Sony, like all over the place. Apple's gone out and made deals just for TV Plus, not the whole TV app with like everything else, but Apple TV Plus content being available on other hardware. And that's really interesting because Apple normally doesn't do that. And there's a version of Apple that would say, no, to watch, Silo or to watch Ted Lasso, you got to have an iPad or an Apple TV. I think they realize that their content business is different than some of these other things. And I find that really encouraging that they're doing the work to get content into more people's houses, kind of regardless of their setup.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's the right move. I mean, if they want this Apple TV Plus to be a success, they want as many people watching it as possible, even if you don't want to buy an iPad,
Yeah.
And I think Apple TV Plus has, the content wise, they've done a really good job of coming up with great content. I mean, Ted Lasso is kind of the poster child of this, but we talked about Silo earlier in the episode. I really thought Foundation was well made. I mean, as somebody who grew up reading the books, thinking that you could never make it into a successful show, they made compromises, and I'm sure I'll hear from Foundation fans that tell me that they messed it up. But I think they're doing a pretty good job with that. And like the types of things they're greenlighting are kind of like on the nerd spectrum, so it's all kind of appealing to me. And I did not expect that I would enjoy their shows as little as I watch TV. A lot of it is Apple TV Plus, and that's not out of some loyalty to Apple. It's just they're making the stuff I want to watch.
Yeah, I think they're doing a really good job with the content. And there is definitely a lot of sort of nerdy sci-fi stuff. But then you have something like Shrinking, which is this incredible, thoughtful, heartwarming TV show that's the opposite of sci-fi. Like the breadth is also really impressive. And I think a lot of people think about sci-fi or fantasy first. I think that's where Apple's strongest, but they are branching out of that. And yeah, I've had a pretty good hit rate on Apple TV Plus. They did a short series about World War II pilots that was unbelievably good. Like,
yeah,
they're writing the checks to make that happen. And there's been reporting that maybe they've written bigger checks than they should have, and maybe they're going to make some adjustments. It's also weird that Apple TV Plus started with no back catalog of like other content, right? Like Netflix, they have Netflix originals, and then they pay to have Friends or The Office or, whatever else. I just named 2 NBC shows that are probably not on it, but they pay for other content to be on their service. Apple started out not doing that. But now sometimes there is stuff, not all the time, and it's not a very big selection, but I think they're also dipping their toes into that. And I think it's all very compelling. And I think that going back to that sort of weird 2019, like Apple TV Plus event, remember like the lights went out, like boom, Jennifer Aniston standing on stage, and then the lights go out, and like boom, someone else is there. Yeah, go rewatch that keynote sometime. It's weird. But all of us were like, what are you doing? Like the history was you made Planet of the Apps, which was like the all-time worst TV show. But they've come so far by hiring the right people, paying for content, working with good studios. I think it's all very impressive. I really, it's surprising to me how good I think they've done.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch Shrinking. You're not the first person to tell me that that's a good show. So
it's great.
I'll have to get that one on my list.
It's a tearjerker at times, but it's good.
Okay. I can take it. it's interesting as we record this show, we're starting to hear news reports of Apple showing interest in making a TV, which is like an on again, off again thing we've heard from Apple. I don't want to get into the rumors. That's not really the point of this state of the platform show. But just, I was curious. Do you think Apple should make a TV?
I don't think so. I think if you're talking about upgrade cycles, TVs are like the longest upgrade cycle. And I just don't see them. I mean, they would be at the high end, right? They'd be competing with like really nice stuff. I just don't see what they could bring to it that's different than anybody else. Like maybe they would have some interesting spatial audio stuff, but then put that in a sound bar or put that in some sort of HomePod thing. Like I just don't see the benefit.
I feel the same as you. And not having seen what they have in mind, and maybe they've got some great idea, but to me, like put that money into just continue to make the Apple TV box better. Find a way to incorporate Apple Intelligence. Let us use the benefits of Apple software with any TV. Don't make us buy an Apple TV.
Yeah.
And that's my kind of gut reaction to it, but we'll see. I mean, this could all just be empty rumors too. This stuff, it feels like every few years there's a rumor Apple's going to make a TV and they never do.
Yeah, I mean, Gene Munster was banging the drum kind of infamously for a long time that Apple was going to be making a television, like dating back to like 2009 or something. I mean, this has been a thing that people have talked about for a long time. But I think really like the reasons back then it didn't make sense, I think also are reasons it doesn't make sense now. And what's different is you have players like Roku and TCL who just eaten the bottom end of the market. And so Sony and Samsung and LG, which is what I have an LG OLED, they've moved into the middle and high ground. And like there's just not room for Apple there unless they did something truly remarkable. And then it would be really expensive. And most people don't like, I did my research. I wanted an OLED. I had a specific size, the way the den is set up. And so the LG was the option. I was happy with that. But most people, when they buy a TV, they go into Costco or Sam's or Walmart and they get the only math they're doing is dollar per inch, right? And like, does this fit on my wall without my spouse killing me? And how cheap can I get it? And like, that's just not a market Apple is very good at. The iPhone and the Mac exist at the high end of markets where people upgrade much more frequently, and the price difference between the low end and high end really isn't that great. Like, yes, a $1,200 iPhone is expensive, but it's competing against $800 and like $600 phones. You're talking about like a cheap TCL TV you bought on Amazon, all the way up to like a 96-inch QOLED Samsung. You couldn't get a wider breadth. And like, where does Apple fit into that? I don't see it being worth their time, honestly.
You want to talk about feelings for the Apple TV?
Yeah. I think it's both of us. It is television in our house, right?
I mean, it's my window to TV. I would not be qualified to make a Apple TV power users show. I'm as likely to spend the evening with my head in a book as I am watching TV. And I mean, to the extent I watch TV, I watch it on Apple TV, and it's always good enough. I mean, recently the local Dodgers got in the World Series against the Yankees, and I've kind of lost interest in sports as I've gotten older. But when I was a kid, that was always a thing. The Yankees and the Dodgers in the World Series. So it was very nostalgic for me. So I bought a month of YouTube TV, and I was able to watch the World Series. And then, after the month, it was over. So it's like, I feel like whatever I need to do with a TV, I can pull off with a Apple TV. And that's good enough.
Same. I'm using Hulu Live TV, and I kind of turn it on and off throughout the year. I actually, then I moved to the Disney ESPN Hulu bundle, so basically it's on all the time. But it is our window into television. And I will say, if you are looking for an Apple TV power users, Magic Rays of Light on Mac Stories is an excellent podcast. Sigmund, one of the hosts, was on MPU not that long ago. So I've got links to that in the show notes. People can go check it out. Those guys are doing a good job over there.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Ecamm. Go to ecamm.com/MacPowerUsers for a powerful live streaming platform for the Mac and get 1 month for free. Ecamm Live is the leading video production and live streaming studio built for the Mac. Ecamm does all aspects of video, not just live streaming. It's perfect for simplifying your workflow. It's easy enough to get started quickly, but powerful enough that you can create just about anything with video. You can do it all with the Ecamm app. What impresses me most about Ecamm is its versatility. Whether you're streaming, recording, or presenting, it has an entire suite of tools that can make your presentation better. It's an entire live streaming and video production studio built right into your Mac. Whether you're streaming, recording, podcasting, or presenting, everything's there in Ecamm, including support for multiple cameras and screen sharing. And a live camera switcher lets you direct the show in real time. So stand out from the crowd with high-quality video and logos, titles, lower thirds, and graphics. Share your screen, drop in video clips, bring on interview guests, and even use a green screen. There's so much more than that because Ecamm Live does it all. Ecamm's members are entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, podcasters, educators, musicians, church leaders, bloggers, and content creators of all kinds. And right now, until December 2nd, Ecamm is running their Make the Switch giveaway, where you can win the ultimate content creation bundle to level up your show or podcast. The prize pack includes a brand new M4 Mac Mini, a free year of Ecamm Live Pro, a free year of Opus Clip, a fully customizable Ecamm template from the live streaming pros, and broadcast branding from the team at PodPack. Enter now at ecamm.tv/giveaway. And don't forget that link, ecamm.com/MacPowerUsers, so you can get signed up and get 1 month for free. Our thanks to Ecamm for their support of the Mac Power Users and all of Relay.
We are running a little long, but look, we got to talk about iCloud. And there's, I think, confusion. We get emails about this sometimes. They're like, what's iCloud? What's iCloud Plus? And so if you look at Apple's website, iCloud is basically the free version. So you get 5 gigabytes of storage, which we're going to talk about. You get data syncing, but that's basically it. So no private relay, no HomeKit secure video, no fancy email stuff. iCloud Plus is what they rebranded basically if you pay for iCloud. And so you get all those features, but really what you're paying for, again, air quotes, is storage, starting at $1 a month in the US for 50 gigs. $3 is 200, $10 is 2 terabytes, and you can go all the way up to 12 terabytes for $60 a month. And you can move between those in iOS or macOS like pretty easily. And so iCloud is the free one, 5 gigs, basic app data syncing, and then iCloud Plus, paid extra storage, and you get HomeKit secure video, private relay, and the fancy email stuff.
Yeah. And it's still, the free tier is still 5 gigabytes.
Yep. After 13 or 14 years, it's mind-boggling. Now, to give Apple just like one iota of credit, a few years ago, they did change it where if you are moving to a new phone, they will temporarily give you enough space to back up your phone to iCloud so you can move to a new one. So you don't have to do like the direct transfer.
I don't give them credit for that.
It's like 2 molecules of credit. You know, it's just
no, it's not even that. It's like acknowledgement that they've blown it. It's like, yeah. Our free tier is so bad that if you give us $1,000 for a phone, there's not enough to move it over. So we have to give you a little extra for that. I
That's fair.
I mean, that's like a stain on Apple. I mean,
yeah.
I get that they're making a lot of money on services and that they need to, and it's a for-profit company, but 5 gigabytes, was it 14 years? My joke used to be that that the Beatles were together longer than, that this has been going on longer than the Beatles were together.
Yeah.
But that was like 4 years ago, I would say that. It's still true. I don't even know what to compare it to, but.
Yeah. And just for some reference, Dropbox, the free version is 2 gigs. Google Drive is free 15 gigs. And then Office 365, the free is 5 gigs. And so they are in the middle. But what I think sets iCloud apart, especially from Dropbox and Office, is that iCloud powers so much about the Apple ecosystem experience. And you're talking about photo syncing, notes, reminders, email, like on and on, and just app syncing, right? Oh, I set my favorites in this sports app and I pick it up on my iPad. It knows my favorites. How does it do that? Because it's syncing with iCloud. Like, it is so much the glue that holds all these products together. And when you hit that limitation, the whole thing kind of comes off the rails in a way that is not very graceful, and it really feels punitive, right? And then they put the cherry on top of the terrible ice cream sundae is then they bad your settings app and say, hey, you're out of space. Give us $2 or $10 or whatever it is. And it really, in the beginning, it felt like an upsell. Now, 14 years later, it feels like you're holding people hostage to their devices in a way that I think you said it right. It's a stain. And I think it's, out of everything in Apple's whole business, this is the part that feels the grossest to me.
Yeah, and the difference between Dropbox and Google is we're not buying $1,000 phones and $3,000 computers from them.
Right.
And this is what you need for that. I mean, I don't need to say anymore that it's bad, because it's bad. To me, the solution would be just to move everything up one. The free tier is 50 gigs, $1 a month for 200 gigs, $10 a month for 2 terabytes. And Apple can, I feel like, I know you're not supposed to say how to spend your money and blah, blah, blah. I would spend their money on this. I think this is what they should do when they're selling this stuff. I also think when you buy a new iPhone, you get 2 years of free photo storage, unlimited photo storage.
Yep.
And after 2 years, then you can say, hey, we gave you 2 years of this for free, but if you want to upgrade your phone, you'll get another 2 years. If not, then you're going to have to pay some more, because you have, a terabyte of photos or whatever. And everybody that I know that's not a Mac Power Users listener, but knows kind of that I do something with Apple, this is the one thing they complain to me about. And I think it's the worst facing thing. It's where they look the cheapest.
Yep.
And I don't know. I just feel like, I get that services are an important part of your business, but this is too much. And, and that's all I have to say. I think my opinion is no, but I feel like there's an easy fix, and it's time. I hope next time we do this, we don't have to have this discussion again.
Yeah. I was just looking at my family iCloud Plus usage, because I've got family sharing set up, and we are at 1.7 of 2 terabytes. And when we cross that, it's going to cost me an extra $20 a month. There's also like a weird gap here. There's nothing kind of in between 2 and 6 terabytes, but you're right. Everything should be knocked down a notch. And the storage issues aside, like I was just going through on my Mac and like looking at everything I use in iCloud, and I use almost all of it. It's all pretty good. Like, it's been a long time since I've had a sync mishap in notes or in photos. You do still run into the occasional weirdness, but I think the adage of Apple's bad at services is basically outdated at this point. And I would always want more control over, like, oh, why doesn't my contact sync? Like, I don't know, like turn it off and turn it back on. Like, we still, I think, need more troubleshooting options and more data recovery options. But I think overall, this stuff is really at a place that is really solid for just about everybody.
Yeah. I mean, and in fairness, bad at services is back when Cloud Sync was hard.
Yeah.
The early days of Cloud Sync, like Google could do it and almost nobody else. And now small developers are building their own Cloud Sync. It's kind of a solved problem. And, Apple has in the background built many, many server farms, which is another reason why I think they can now afford to make this jump with the free tier.
Mm-hmm.
It should be a solved problem, right? I mean, Now the modern version of that is artificial intelligence. It's like, oh yeah, Apple's bad at that. They're not doing good enough with Apple Intelligence. But that too will be a solved problem once we get a little bit into the future. So it's just, it's just a thing where they're figuring out a new tech, a new piece of their business. But I'm with you. Like using the features of iCloud are great. Everything syncs. And even the file stuff, it's not as good as Dropbox in some ways, but you can absolutely get by with it.
Yeah.
And, I use Mail, I use it all, and it's fine.
Yeah. If you want to know how bad it was, go read this thing I wrote about MobileMe. Like if you really don't remember what it was like, that article will jolt your memory, I think.
So I would give them thumbs up for all the progress they've made with it, and don't be cheap.
Don't be cheap. That's a huge thing here. Yeah, I use it all too, except for Mail, and it's maybe better now, honestly. But I, for a long time, had a lot of like spam issues with iCloud email, and just eventually I had a Gmail account all along and just made that my primary. And that's been years and not really looking to change that. But there are some features in Mail that I think I in particular was dubious of when they announced, but I heard from people then, I've heard and read things more recently that in particular, using your own domain for iCloud email, which is like the reason a lot of people used Google at first, was like, well, I want to use my company domain name. I don't want to be, Dave's pressure washing at gmail.com or iCloud.com. They've gotten that up and running, and I've heard from people who are using it and are pretty happy with it. And the Hide My Email, I think, is actually really a really nice innovation. So if you sign up for something, or if you sign in with Apple, which is this other service, you don't pass your real email address along to them. It's like this string of random stuff, and you can go in there and disable those. So if I put my email address in some website and start getting spam, I can just go turn it off, which is really, really cool. And I want more companies and more email services to do that, because I think it's a great, great feature.
Yeah, I feel like Apple Mail is excellent for as a consumer.
Yeah.
Actually, I still have a .mac. My personal email is a .mac email. And I was in an Apple store, and the guy's like, well, that's a humble brag. I'm like, no, I'm just old. But yeah, so I use that. But for the work stuff, I use Fastmail because, I have collaborators, and there's some stuff that, Apple Mail isn't really made to do some of that stuff. But yeah, it's good, and it's solid, and occasionally it has downtime like any other service, but it doesn't feel to me like it's like out of the ordinary. And
sure.
And I do think Apple has really, the modern product of Apple is services. That's kind of one of the big takeaways of the Cook era, is he figured out how to monetize services to the benefit of the shareholders. And as a user, I'm generally okay with it so long as they do a good job, and they're doing a good job. There's a lot of other services too, though. An abundance, Apple Music, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they've got their music service. It took a while to get that kind of off the ground. It's good. Are you using it? What do you think of it?
Yeah. That's in the family plan, all Apple Music. I did the thing where back in the day, I had used iTunes Match, and that's included in Apple Music. So if you're paying for both, stop paying for iTunes Match. It's included in Apple Music, and it's fantastic, right? Like a new album comes out or a playlist I subscribe to, click on it on one device, it shows up on all the others. Really, my complaints about Apple's music situation is that I can't, it's not in the world of continuity. So I can't have my music playing on my phone in my truck via CarPlay, and then that music is like queued up and ready to go for me on the Mac. and that's because I think the Mac Music app is pretty old. But I would like to see them modernize that on the Mac, so I can move more freely between my devices, like I can with everything else.
Yeah. I feel like it's good enough, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not again, a power user subscription service. Like one of my kids subscribes to Spotify
Hmm.
because all of her friends have the various lists and they're really into it. And I'm like, great, you get to pay for that,
Yeah.
and, but I have a family plan and they've got a great selection of jazz, that which is what I'm looking for. If, I can find undiscovered Dexter Gordon albums, I'm happy. And I do wish they would kind of give jazz the same treatment they gave classical music,
Mm.
but maybe that's, maybe there's not enough people interested or whatever. But it's good. And I've got a ton of great playlists. I've got my Yule playlist. You know what? I'm going to put that in the show notes. I announce that every year off the blog, but I have a Christmas/jazz playlist I've been curating for over 10 years now. It's a lot of music, but every year I hear from listeners that still use it. But yeah, it's kind of fun. I get to share it through Apple Music, no problem. All good. One thing about Apple Music that you and I have never talked about on the show is spatial audio. That's kind of the new thing they do where they remix stuff. Thoughts, Stephen? What do you think of spatial audio?
I'm not a big user of it. I mean, there's the aspect of it is like, oh, the sound is coming from my phone, and that part is weird to me, the directional stuff. But in terms of like spatial audio and like, okay, I'm listening to an album and it's been mastered or mixed where it has this separation and like this 3D sort of sound. I have found that the quality of that is unbelievably varied. That
Yeah.
some albums that come out in spatial audio are really good and it adds like something compelling, and others it clearly was an afterthought or was done after the fact, or just like it's done poorly. And so
So,
I'm honestly not a big user of it.
sometimes it feels like a stunt, like the mix is so extreme. But
Yeah,
the
yeah. And I think it's one of those things where a dab will do you, you know?
yeah, and I've got these albums I've listened to my whole life, and when I hear them spatial audio, I kind of like that they're a little different, so long as they don't go overboard with it, and that's cool. But I don't really have anything against it. I'm not like hugely into it, but I do like to hear when some album that I love gets the treatment just to see how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Apple Music, solid. Again, I feel like it's good enough. Apple Arcade, Apple kind of, Apple and gaming is such a thing, and we should probably have somebody on at some point who's an expert in this. But neither one of us are big gamers. But like in some ways, Apple has always ignored gamers. In other ways, they're a huge gaming company because of their mobile platforms. I think the vision of Apple Arcade is a good one where they're kind of like nice games that are mobile friendly, that aren't going to be asking to buy more coins every 5 minutes. I think that's kind of the vision for it. I feel like they've more or less delivered on that. And occasionally I find myself getting hooked on one and playing it a lot. And then I don't play any games for several months. And then
Same.
I find another one.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that they're using Apple Arcade for software preservation, that these old titles come back, but I'm not a gamer, and yeah, sometimes I'll play something for a little while, then basically I have it because I pay for Apple One, and I would not have it otherwise.
Yeah. What about Fitness Plus?
I should use it more. That's my one sentence review. I should use it more.
Yeah, I like it. Daisy and I have been on a health push. We do Pilates 2 or 3 times a week, and I walk the dog like a 2 mile hike most days, and I'm working on it. And Apple Fitness Plus has become a part of the mix. I do some of the stretches, I do some of the body exercises, I do some of the core stuff, and I find it a nice mix. Like I was thinking, I want to try something more like a gym or something, but I'm not really a gym guy. I don't like people yelling at me. But I feel like between the other stuff I'm doing, the Apple Fitness Plus stuff is definitely a piece of it. I have a TV here in the studio and a yoga mat, and I, often will come down and do a session before I take a shower. And I feel like I'm using it kind of the way they meant it to be. I'm disappointed they haven't expanded more. Like they made a Tai Chi tracker, and I was hoping Tai Chi would be kind of fun on Apple Fitness Plus. They never did that. It feels a little stuck to me. And maybe it's just because there's not enough people using it to justify the expense. But I feel like they've put the investment in building the studios. They've got these great coaches who are kind of like the right match, I feel like. For me, they're not like, you don't have any of the coaches on Apple Fitness Plus that make you feel like dirt. And I would just like to see them put the gas down a little harder with more different, varied types of workouts. But overall, it's good, and I get my money's worth out of it.
What about Apple News Plus?
My thoughts on this are complicated. I feel like in general, I don't, no matter what side of the political spectrum on, I feel like the news as entertainment thing has really hurt us all. It's put us in tribes where we don't like each other, total strangers. We judge because of, whether they're the left side of the bird or the right side of the bird, left wing, right wing, whatever. And I feel like news has become such a part of that it's made it hard to consume news without realizing that, oh no, they're just trying to get you enraged so you stick around longer and watch more ads. But I feel like Apple has an opportunity with Apple News to make something that gives us a way to consume news without, getting caught in it, since we're paying for it. I don't know. I'm really kind of rambling here, but I was thinking leading up to the show, wouldn't it be nice if there was an online news source that didn't try to mess with you in order to get you to watch longer?
Yeah.
And wouldn't Apple be the perfect company to make something like that? I don't think Apple News Plus is that.
No.
But I wish that it would be. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement there. I think if anyone could pull it off, it could be something like Apple News Plus. I'm just continually surprised how many people in my life use Apple News. Like, I just get Apple News links from people who aren't nerdy, who aren't listening to my shows, but it's how they consume news, because they can put in their interests and like it kind of learns from you over time. And that's really interesting. Like, I think Apple News is more widely used than I give it credit for.
Yeah, but I do think they have an opportunity there. It would be nice to have a news source that actually was like the old days and just gave you the news.
Yeah. I'd like to see them improve the ad situation. The ads are pretty bad in Apple News Stories. That's more on the publisher side than Apple, but kind of gross. And they do this thing where say that I don't want to see this source anymore. Well, it doesn't really go away. You just get a big block and it says, you've blocked this source. I'm like, well, just don't show it to me then. Like, that seems like a pretty simple thing to fix.
Yeah. Did you understand what I said when I said I don't want to see this anymore?
Yeah, exactly. Apple Podcasts, I think, is also something that's much bigger than we give it credit for in our little corner of the internet where like everyone's using Overcast or Pocket Cast or something. Apple Podcasts is huge. Their paid service is really interesting, and I hear it advertised on like big podcasts, like, hey, join in Apple Podcasts and get, like what we do in our membership, but doing it solely in the Apple ecosystem. And I think Apple is continuing to do a good job with its app. I think in places the app is a little convoluted, but I think they're doing a good job in making it more clear what you're doing. But most importantly, the Apple Podcasts directory continues to power the directories in most other apps. They've continued for that to be an open thing, and that I am glad for. Apple does a lot with podcasts in terms of the specifications and other things that sometimes are good, sometimes are weird. But overall, I think Apple holds its power over podcasting pretty well.
Yeah. The app itself had a really kind of checkered beginning. It was like, remember when it was the reel to reel, and it was bad in the early days. And like every year when we get into beta season, I just run Apple Podcasts from like June to September. And this year I noticed like I did not really miss my Overcast as much as I had in years past. Like it's really got to a point where it's a very functional podcast app. And like I actually like the way it surfaces new episodes of the stuff you subscribe to.
Yeah.
And they've clearly put a lot of thought into it, and it's a solid app now. And you don't have to pay anybody if you don't. If you want to save money, it's a good app. Good for them. And I still prefer kind of the power features that Marco gives us with Overcast, and he just did his big re-release and redesign, so I kind of like that. Also, it's part I want to support a friend, but I think of Overcast for me is still my preferred podcast player, but boy, the distance between Apple Podcasts and something like Overcast is not as big as it used to be.
Apple Books, I honestly forgot existed until we were putting this list together.
I like that.
And I got books in there, for sale. But I prefer reading on the Kindle with e-ink. I'm basically fully in the Amazon ecosystem for my ebooks. And sorry, Apple Books.
I mean, over the last couple of years, I've gotten increasingly where I'm buying physical books again. But there's kind of like lines in my head I draw where, like, if it's like a book, a proper book that I want to read and annotate, that new Rick Rubin book, for example, or even like I've been reading a lot of Seneca. Chicago Press has a bunch of those, and I've been buying those as hardcover books. But if it's like, the productivity book of the month kind of thing, I just get them digital. I don't want to I have limited shelf space, and I don't want to stick all those on the shelf. So where do I buy them? I buy them from Kindle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amazon does a good job of it.
Yeah.
And e-ink is really nice.
Yeah. And like you, I have books there too. But I've just, for whatever reason over the years, and I think it is that is the one thing e-ink is really good for, is reading books. And I have 2 Kindles at this point. I've got the big one that I keep in the studio where I read, and I've got the little one which I keep next to the bed. And I find myself going to those things.
Yep.
Apple Intelligence we're going to talk about in a separate show coming up. We're still in the beta of the first release of it. The total thing isn't even out yet. So once we get a better idea of like how does it work with the new Siri and things like that, we're going to give it its own show. So we're holding judgment on that at this point.
All of this, or a lot of this, can be had through the Apple One bundle. I got a link to this. We do this because like every once in a while I go in. There's actually this really clever user interface for this where you can like check and uncheck what you want. And the bundle is a better deal for me, even though I'm not using Apple Arcade at all and barely use Apple Fitness Plus. That it's cheaper for me with the iCloud storage space I want and Apple Music. Basically, that's what I'm paying for, and the other stuff comes along for free. But that's done in the settings app in macOS or iOS or whatever. But they have bundled all this stuff. And for an individual, it starts at $20 a month. For a family, it starts at $26 a month. And then there's Premier, which is $38 a month. And you can see all the price breakdown. Of course, that may be different wherever you are. But I think generally, if you're using more than a few of these things, Apple One is probably a good deal. So I would go spend some time on that website or in the settings app and see, could you be making some money, saving some money rather.
Yeah. No, it's good. And like even if you don't like the games or you don't like the news, it still may make sense for you. So take a look. And then once you get those things, you start finding uses for them. Like the Fitness Plus, I think I never would have paid for, but because I get it, I use it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Services in general. I just wanted to point something out. Maybe listeners aren't tracking this stuff. Apple's iPhone revenue in 2023 was give or take $200 billion. Apple's services revenue in 2023, $85 billion. Almost half of what the iPhone made.
I will say, I'll put on my pundit hat for a second. The services revenue includes some things that are not really services, like Google paying Apple to be the default search engine, which is that's going to come to an end, it looks like.
That's a lot of billions.
That's going to go away probably. The App Store is also in there, like the 30% or the 15% they're making from developers. They also count as services revenue. But there's no doubt that a lot of that money is coming from Apple Music customers and iCloud Plus customers. And look, in a weird way, they've kind of sold as many iPhones as they can sell, right? Like the world is only so big.
Yeah.
Only a set number of people want an iPhone or can afford an iPhone. And for them to continue to grow, which is what Wall Street demands of these publicly traded companies, they've got to look at monetizing the users they have. And to a much, much smaller degree, monetizing new users through things like TV Plus on a Samsung TV, right? But getting more money out of the pockets of people who already have their hardware is the name of the game now. And a lot of people with our bent and interest look at this and think it's gross and Apple should get out of these businesses. And I totally understand that and even sympathize with it to a certain degree. But I think looking at each service individually and grading its worth and its value, for me at least, shows that on the whole, most of these services I find useful. And even though I don't use all of them or even think all of them are good, Apple continues to improve on them, just like they do their hardware, just like they do on their software. And that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to spend money on Apple services if they make them good. I mean, I like the general company ethic, the way they generally lean towards privacy. I think there's a lot here that I would prefer Apple to be the vendor than someone else. I mean, just like the recent rumor that Apple might make cameras. Like I would much more likely trust a camera from Apple than one from a third party that I don't know where the camera feed is actually going and things like that. So I think there's a lot left for them to do with services and this kind of income, but it's just something to acknowledge too. I also think that, this can also turn into chiseling very easily. And I hope that they're careful about that.
Yeah, me too.
All right. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. That will wrap up our state of the platforms for this year. Curious to see what happens between now and the next time we cover these. You can go to relay.fm/MPU for feedback and membership if you want to get in more Power User where you get the ad-free extended version of the show. Regardless, thank you to our sponsors today, Squarespace and Ecamm, and we'll see you next time.